over 85,000 people in Mississippi working in this particular sector of our economy. That's almost 1 in 10 Mississippians. That's a huge number. Literally millions and millions and millions of dollars flow into Mississippi because of the people that are in this room today and the great work that they're doing. And I'm going to thank them for their efforts and then encourage them to let's all join together and do even better, because I think this is a space where we really have an opportunity for growth. Thank you all. Thank you, Rochelle, for those very, very kind introductory remarks. What a privilege it is for me to be with this group, and what a privilege it is for me to be in your hometown, Mayor, here in the great town of Natchez, Mississippi. And it's so appropriate that I have the opportunity to address this group in this town, because not long after I got elected state treasurer the very first time, I ran in 2003 and was elected in November, sworn in January of 2004. Not long after having been elected nearly 12 years ago, a little over 12 years ago, I went to a conference, and I don't even recall exactly where it was, of the National Association of State Treasurers. That's a group that I ultimately became president of a couple years later. But a few years prior to me attending this conference in 2004, our former state treasurer had hosted a conference of the Southern treasurers in Natchez. And the reason I tell you this story is because while at this newly formed group that I'd never been to, this man came up to me and he said, "Are you the new treasurer of the state of Mississippi?" I said, "Yes, sir, I am." And he looked at me and he said, I've got to be honest. He lived in New York City. He said, I had never been to the state of Mississippi before until the Southern Treasurers Conference in Natchez. And he said, I'd heard a lot of things about your state, but I attended this event in Natchez. I took my wife. It was her first time to visit your state. And his impression was as follows. He said, we were there for about 3 days. We decided, after having been there 3 days, that we were going to stay a couple of extra days. And he said, if I get my wishes, although I've still only visited your state one time, when I retire, I want to retire in Natchez, Mississippi. And so the reason I tell that story is because many of you have probably heard me say before that I believe that our number one responsibility in my position is job creation, bringing better and higher paying jobs to our state. But I also believe that government does not create jobs. Government's role is to create an environment which encourages those of you in the private sector to invest capital and create jobs. And as I think about that story, I am reminded that for Mississippi to see long-term economic prosperity, whether that is through increased capital investment in the manufacturing space or through increased investment in our tourism space, our biggest challenge in our state is one and the same. And our biggest challenge is convincing that CEO who's never been here before, or convincing that tourist who has never been here before, to come here once. If we ever convince them to come here once, almost without exception, they tend to like what they see. And so when I think about your business and the fact that we have nearly 125,000 Mississippians that are working in your business. By the way, we have, as you all know, 3 million people in our state. The workforce is approximately 1 million people in our state. Therefore, over 1 in 10 Mississippians work in your space. But when if you feel the need to applause at any time, go ahead and do it. If it doesn't make you feel better, it will make me feel better, okay? When I think about tourism and promoting our state, I really want to support initiatives that showcase our unique history, our natural resources, as well as our cultural diversity. We've got a number of elected officials here today, and I want to thank all of them for being here. Certainly Representative Curry, the chairman of tourism in the House of Representatives, and then 2 of my 52 bosses. You know, a lot of people have this whole legislative thing all messed up. They think that I am the boss of the senators. Well, that's not at all the case. It's actually the opposite. Any authority, any responsibility that the lieutenant governor has in Mississippi is not granted through the Constitution. It's not even granted through state statute. It is granted through the rules of the Senate, and the 52 members of the Senate actually vote to pass those rules. And so any authority or responsibility I have is because of the votes that were taken by those 52 senators when we first came into office earlier this year. But Senator Deering here from Natchez, who's been in the Mississippi Senate for 33 years and has been a long time supporter of this industry and particularly of this area of the state, as well as Senator Chazanal, the person that I appointed chair of our committee back 5 years ago, to continue her tenure, and she's just doing a great job. And you can rest assured knowing that no one argues and advocates for you and your industry more than Senator Lydia Chazanal does. And she's really effective at it too, I might add. You know, I have 2 doors in my office. Some of you have been in my office. I have 2 doors. One goes out into the office where my staff is. One goes out the back door to the chamber of the Mississippi Senate. And it's just amazing to me when we get close to time to actually start doing the appropriation bills. It's amazing to me that Senator Chazanal can be at both doors at the same time. And there's no way that I can get out without her being in my ear, urging more investment in your industry. But quite frankly, my background is in investments. It is in managing money for a living. And as Rochelle said earlier, for me, it's all about return on investment. The fact of the matter is we're going to have limited resources in Mississippi. We're never going to have as much money as you would like for us to spend. We're never going to have as much money as our friends in the education community would like for us to spend. And so we have to make choices. And the best way for us to make choices is to ensure that we are investing in areas where there is a positive return on investment. And I think the investment that we made this year certainly does that. The other thing that we've tried to do since I have been Lieutenant Governor is invest not only as we did this past year in more marketing dollars, but also invest in our facilities. We've spent a significant amount of resources on some of our older buildings in our state, such as the Mississippi State Capitol. Before I became Lieutenant Governor, we had a lot of people who walked through the Mississippi Capitol, but we had no way of tracking the numbers or anything along those lines, and we've really changed that. In fact, we had more than 4,000 visitors in the Capitol between May and July of this year. We're having over 1,000 people a month visit the Mississippi Capitol. And again, back to that point of trying to make that positive first impression, it is amazing to me how many times I walk through the Mississippi Capitol and I introduce myself to various visitors. And evidently, when one gets retired, or at least a lot of people, when they get retired, they travel from state to state and actually visit state capitals. It is almost without exception agreed upon by those who have been to many state capitals that our new Capitol building, and I say that almost tongue-in-cheek since our new Capitol building we moved in 1903, but our new Capitol building, almost without exception, garners praise from people all across the country as one of the 5 prettiest Capitol buildings in the entire country. That's yet another example of things that we as a state ought to be proud of, and that we as a state ought to be working to drive people for potential tourism dollars. We've worked, I see Katie Blunt here, we've worked with the Department of Archives and History very, very closely, because when we have people come visit our state capitol building, we don't want them just to visit our new Capitol building. We want them also to go to our old Capitol building, which is one of the coolest facilities, I think, in our state. My wife Ely and I had our Christmas party there last year. Completely privately funded, by the way. I feel like I should, in this day and age, state that, but it's one of the most beautiful buildings in the state, and so we've tried to do that. And then now that our two museums project is going to come online here very, very soon, we want to make sure that people have the opportunity to not only visit our new Capitol and our old Capitol, but also those two museums in which Mississippi has invested just shy of $100 million on those two facilities. And so we want to continue to work as it relates to that. Look, the fact of the matter is, tourism is a vitally important part of our long-term strategy to improve the economic vitality. I read this when I came in, and a lot of these words really, really warmed my heart up. But increased economic vitality is what it's all about from our perspective, and I'm glad to share that particular goal with you. And let's talk just a little bit about where we find ourselves today. I've always said that if we're going to see improved economic vitality and prosperity in our state, it's really going to take three things. We've got to have a fiscally responsible government. I've worked hard now for 13 years to ensure that's the case, and despite what you may have read in the newspaper, we have a very, very strong fiscal foundation in our state. We're in the last year and this year combined, we're in the best fiscal shape this state's been in many, many, many years. The second thing that we must have is we must have a tax code that is fair, one that is flat, one that encourages economic development and capital investment, not one that discourages it. And the third thing that we must have long term is we must improve the educational attainment level of our citizens. One of the things that I found that I heard recently, we're doing some tax policy and some budget review panels in the state capitol, and we had an economist come from the Tax Foundation recently and looking at our overall tax structure. And I found it very, very interesting that if you look at across the country, for every $1 that people pay in taxes, this is in aggregate across the nation, people pay 78 cents to their state and local governments that are inside their state, and they pay 22 cents to governmental entities that are outside the state in which they reside. In Mississippi, Mississippians pay, for every dollar in state and local taxes we pay, Mississippians pay 70 cents to state and local governments inside the state, and 30 cents of that dollar to local governments outside the state. And so that 30 cents of the dollar that they're paying are, I would argue, are taxes that people are paying because of choices that they made. And in many instances, it's because of choices that they made to travel outside the state. And so those numbers tell me, at least, that we've got to do more and more to attract others from outside the state of Mississippi into our state. And I think we're going to continue to do that. As I mentioned earlier, there's no secret that this was a very challenging to write a state budget this year. If you look at revenues in our state, it's no different than it is in virtually every other state. We're seeing a slowdown in revenue growth across the country, and Mississippi is certainly no exception to that. There were areas where state services saw cuts. Most of the cuts that we saw, by the way, were actually cuts in growth, not actual year-over-year cuts, but there were cuts. And so I'm proud of the fact that this year we were able to spend about $9.4 million in aggregate for both the tourism division at the Mississippi Development Authority and also for additional investments in our bicentennial. I look at 2017. I look at 2017 as a unique opportunity for Mississippi to tell our story. It's actually a complicated past, but it's also, in my mind, a very bright future. And I think we need to be willing and able to talk about both. And that's something that I think we're going to do in 2017. Today we're enjoying our lunch here in the first territorial capital of Mississippi. You know, our friends here from Natchez kind of laugh at us at the state level. I mean, we're just celebrating our bicentennial. They just finished celebrating their tricentennial. So, you know, they're like, come on, catch up, right? But in all seriousness, events marking our 200th birthday will begin next month, as was mentioned earlier, with the 20-star American flag, the flag that was designed after Mississippi became a state in 1817. Begins a tour around the state. It will begin in Columbus, but that's not the only opportunity to see it. It will visit 8 other communities through next spring, so over about a 6-month period. I've seen the flag, and it's in the old Capitol right now, and it is fabulous. And so it's really a neat opportunity to see some of Mississippi's history. In addition to that as sort of a kickoff event, we're also seeing, we also have a website, which is ms200.org. To share information on all of the events that are being planned across our state. Musical celebrations are slated in the northern, central, and southern areas of our state. You know, a fun fact that most of you probably already know is that these musical celebrations that are going to occur in each region of our state, the one is going to be particularly special, I think, in South Mississippi, because, as you may know, the World War I actually stopped the celebration that was to be held at the Centennial Plaza in Gulfport when the state turned 100 years old in 1917. And so this is an opportunity to, 100 years later, showcase Centennial Plaza, which was scheduled for 100 years ago. But we invested, the legislature did, the governor's team came to us at the very early stages of the session and asked for $1.6 million to spend on those events and venues, and we made the decision in the budgeting process, again, a very complicated and challenging year, to do exactly that, to give them 100% of what they asked for. And I know, and by the way, Craig, congratulations on your coming back to the state. We're proud to have you. And I know that he's going to do a fantastic job ensuring that we get a positive return on investment on that and the other dollars that we spend. And of course, I would anticipate that the finale of our bicentennial celebration will be at the opening of the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum and the Mississippi Museum of Mississippi History. Should occur sometime in December. But I want you to also know that we're not just spending money on bicentennial. I believe that the bicentennial is an opportunity for us to kick off what hopefully will be a continued effort to see significantly more investments and more dollars going to convince more and more people to come to our state. We've got so many things in so many areas of our state to show off. Everything from the new Grammy Museum in Cleveland to the planned and proposed Arts and Entertainment Center in Meridian. The state has made our capital investment in that facility. The local government and really the private sector has raised significant dollars for that facility. And just recently they went to the polls as a community and decided to raise their sales tax to help pay and fund part of that facility. And so that will come online fairly soon. I was just recently in Tupelo and had the opportunity to tour Elvis's birthplace and the museum there, and had a fantastic time. I've been doing this for a while now, but I learned an enormous amount about Elvis's life just walking through that museum. And you know, I think when we look at that, we realize that Mississippi has so many things to celebrate and so many places to show off. It would be foolish for us not to be willing to invest more and more in the business that you are in, and that's something that we've got to continue to do. I've also supported state investment in the Mississippi Book Festival. I think it's incredible that we've had over 11,000 people on the grounds of the Mississippi Capitol over the last 2 years, celebrating Mississippi's rich history in authors, and I think that's something that's very good. In fact, I was sitting at dinner yesterday out of state, or last night out of state, And one of the gentlemen I was eating with was talking about. We were talking about he had been involved in a professional football team at one time, and he had actually been involved in drafting Marcus Dupree. And so he was talking about the fact that he had the book, and it was signed, the original book that was written, The Courting of Marcus Dupree. Well, does anybody know who wrote that book? Willie Morris. And so it gave me an opportunity again out of state to talk about the Willie Morris being one of the great authors and famous authors in Mississippi, but he is one of very, very many. And so yet again, another thing that we have to celebrate. Not only are we investing in facilities, we're also trying to pass legislation which allows for the improvement of the opportunity and the improvement of the experience. We had a very good debate this year and ultimately passed what we call the Go Cup legislation, which will allow some communities, only those communities who want it, only those communities who asked for it, only those communities who then have their local elected officials vote for it, to allow for the opportunity to create special recreational districts where visitors can walk with their cocktail in hand under specific guidelines where it makes sense to allow them to do so. We're seeing communities do that. And it's something that I'm certainly proud of. Not only have we done special pieces of legislation to help encourage to improve the experience, we also have looked in the area of taxation. You've heard me talk a lot about taxation. We think we need a tax code that is fair, one that is flatter, and one that encourages more capital investment. We're going to continue down that path. But we've also taken opportunities where we saw a state agency, in this particular case, the Department of Revenue, where the legislature believed that they were overstepping their bounds. There was a situation in 2014 in which the Cawpaw Canoe in Clarksdale faced a $41,000 tax bill from the State Department of Revenue. Well, in this particular instance, a company that was one of the pioneers of ecotourism, we believed was becoming unfairly charged. It was not the intent of the original tax code as it was passed. The federal government and other states exempt those taxes for businesses operating on navigable waters. And so this was an agency decision that did not reflect the goals of the legislative leadership. And so the legislature took action and exempted state sales tax for watercraft on navigable waterways, giving guided tours. And so, again, another way for us to attempt to do everything we can to support you and your industry. We've done a number of things for those in the private sector, everything from passing legislation to eliminate the inventory tax in our state, to passing legislation that will eliminate the corporate franchise tax. We've done it in a responsible way. We phased it in over the next 12 to 13 years, but we've done it in a way that, again, encourages capital to be invested in our state. I tell you this to tell you that everything that we're doing is again, focused on what we believe will make Mississippi the most competitive place in America to invest capital, the most competitive place in America to create jobs, and the most competitive and nicest place in America to attract more Americans to come to our state. When you talk about what you can do to create a positive image for our state, the best thing we can do to create a positive image for our state, in my mind, is for every American to visit Mississippi. Because when they come here, they tend to like what they see. And I'm going to conclude with this because I know y'all got other things to do and other people to hear from. When I think about the opportunities that we have in the future, I really get excited. I get excited about the opportunities because everything that we've tried to do since I got elected Lieutenant Governor 5 years ago has really been about improving our economic environment. The fact of the matter is that my wife Ely and I both grew up in small Mississippi towns. We both went to small Mississippi public high schools. We both graduated from high school and went to Mississippi colleges. We graduated from Mississippi colleges. I said we went to a Mississippi college, not the Mississippi college, just for clarification. We both went to Millsaps. We both graduated from Mississippi colleges, and we got out and we got Mississippi jobs. And everything that I've done as Lieutenant Governor has been in an attempt and an effort to ensure that my kids, now 11, 9, and 4, and your kids and grandkids have that same opportunity, that they graduate from Mississippi schools and they have the opportunity to stay in Mississippi and work in Mississippi and raise their families in Mississippi. Not long after I mentioned earlier, I was elected president of the National Association of State Treasurers. Not long after I got elected, I was traveling around the country giving speeches. And this little lady in the back, there's about 600 people in this room where I spoke one night. And this little lady came up to me afterwards. I'm not going to tell you where we were, but we weren't in Mississippi. Came up to me and she said, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, Mr. Treasurer at the time, she said, look, you seemed like you were successful in the private sector before you got into government. You were elected as the youngest statewide elected official in America. You've been successful in your peers. At the time, 35 of which were members of the other party, elected you to be president of their national association. She said, it seems to me like you've been real successful in life and that you can live anywhere you want to in the world. Why do you choose to live in Mississippi? And I immediately replied to this little lady and in the only way that I knew how. I said, ma'am, you are exactly right. I can live anywhere in the world I want to live. I said, but I can't imagine raising my little girls anywhere but Mississippi. And I say that simply to say that sometimes we spend way too much time apologizing and not nearly enough time bragging. And I believe, and I think you believe, in your local communities, we've got an awful lot to brag about. Now it's all of our responsibility to go out and with sufficient resources, go brag about it. And if we do that, we'll not only grow and improve the image of our state, we'll grow the economy of our state. And that's good for everybody. Thank y'all.